Welcome to another episode of Encounter, Grow, Witness, a podcast from the Archdiocese of Detroit, where Beth Spazzarni and I, Father Steve Polis, talk about what it means to be joyful missionary disciples in the field of our parishes and all the work we're doing here in the Archdiocese to unleash the gospel. So, Beth, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fantastic. I was going to say splendid, then I thought, let's calm down a little bit.
Yeah, probably.
I'm fantastic.
Pull it back
not
a little,
splendid.
rein it in.
Yeah. And we're blessed to have with us one of our great pastoral ministers here, a man I'm blessed to call a friend for a number of years now, Mr. John Lajiness. John, how are you?
I'm great, Father Steve. I'll even go with splendid. I'm
Splendid.
one
All
coffee
right.
into it, so I can claim splendid at this point. So.
All right, that's fantastic. I think it's a great day here in Detroit. A great day to follow the Lord and to know His blessings in our life. I know this year has been a transition for me, coming to Sacred Heart Seminary and teaching full time. And one of the beautiful things about teaching, so just a blessing in my life, has been learning material kind of in a new and deeper way. One of the axioms is if you really want to know something, teach it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm learning that new this year. So teaching a couple of courses for the seminarians and causing me to study it and learn it a lot more. So that's been a real blessing in my life. Beth, anything, any good news in your life these days?
Good news in my life. That's tough. I think for me, what I've been appreciating most this year is just getting up in the winter and going outside, going for runs a couple times a week. And I just feel like I'm going out to discover beauty in the world. Like the sun is just rising. The snow is beautiful.
Wow.
It's
that might
just
be the
very
most
exciting.
optimistic Michigan winter outlook
It may be.
I have ever heard.
That's probably true. But there's just something so beautiful.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's just my time with God when I get up and I get to go run in the crisp morning air and the sun is just coming over the houses and my neighborhood isn't that magical, but it feels pretty lovely in the morning. So, yeah.
That's great. John, Beth, and I usually talk about just God's grace in our life. We didn't tell you this beforehand, but anything you want to share, putting you on the spot here?
You know, there is definitely grace in a beautiful, crisp winter morning, and I got into running.
Allegedly,
that's what I
there's
was gonna
grace in
say.
that.
Like I got
You
into
don't
running
have to
myself a couple years ago, and so
Yeah.
I definitely appreciate that. I really do appreciate Michigan winters from the indoors, though.
They're
the
lovely,
snow
aren't
is
they?
so beautiful this morning. When I looked on from the inside, it was glorious.
Yes, it's true.
No, new grace, I would say today, and maybe what I'm thankful for is got to spend, last evening the Super Bowl. I'm not sure if we're time referencing this, but we're recording the day after
the morning
Super Bowl
after the
wins.
Super Bowl,
That's
Matthew
right.
Stafford.
Yeah. But got to spend that with some great friends, and I had one friend reach out to me this morning and just remind me that our friendship was unconditional, and that the love that God has shared between us never goes away. And so being able to, you only have, I think, certain opportunities to have a friendship at really that kind of level. So just getting that message to start the morning really kind of made this a good start to a day.
That's
So
pretty
God is
awesome.
good.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Beth and I were talking about just, because the goal of this podcast is to walk with, accompany our pastoral ministers all throughout the Archdiocese of Detroit, and maybe those of you who are in other dioceses or other apostolates who are listening. But to talk about, how we can do that best in times that are not always perfect. Because it's easy to be a disciple when we are loving the crisp morning air of winter, whatever that's about. But it can be challenging when that morning doesn't look so crisp, or when the air is a little more biting, or when the sun isn't shining, when the snow is a little grayer than white. And one of those times can be transitions in pastors. And I know, both John and Beth have gone through that pretty acutely, and the graces and the challenges that brings. So I think our goal today is to talk about the graces those bring and how to work through some of those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this might be good just to kind of get a little foundation of, John, I have worked with you for the last few years at St. John Vianney in Shelby Township. And you and I both, but you more so being there full time, went through a transition with the pastor. Would you mind just kind of telling us a little bit about Father Tim?
Yeah, sure. So, I arrived at St. John Vianney in 2014, and the pastor at the time was Father Tim Mazer. And Father Tim and I also went back quite a ways. I was in seminary formation myself for a few years. That was part of my discernment path. And so I first met Father Tim through then. It had been, at the point I sat down with him, it had probably been 20 years since we had seen each other last. So we were kind of picking up anew. And we were just talking about friendship. We had one of those kind of spiritual brotherhoods that kind of went across the decade, so to speak. So we hadn't seen each other in ages, but we picked up as if we were, had seen each other the day before. And, we had in the interview process and kind of discussion, we saw that our connection was pretty profound, and it looked like it was going to work out. And I had told Father Tim, look, I'm the kind of guy that I really feel like if the Lord brings me to a parish, most often I really feel like he's brought me there to serve that priest and to really lay down my life for that priest. And so I told him, I'm like, I'm the kind of guy that I will run through a wall for you. And I want to, kind of lay my ministry at your feet and do whatever whatever the Lord, kind of puts on your heart that we need to do it, but I'll give my all. And he said, I really appreciate that, John, but if you're gonna run through a wall, we're gonna run through it together. And that was the time of ministry with Father Tim was a profound gift in a lot of different ways. And we walked through a lot of joys and victories. We walked through a lot of sadness, a lot of hurt. It kind of spanned the whole thing.
So sorry, you came there in 2014.
Correct.
Father Tim came there, I think, a couple of years before
2010.
that. 2010.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
And so in November of 2019, Father Tim went to a dentist appointment. He had just come back off a parish pilgrimage to Rome that was truly like one of the highlights of his priesthood. Like he just came on he was on the mountaintop, right? He was he was floating on air. And literally about 3 to 4 weeks after that, he went into the dentist routine appointment, and he called me and he said, "Hey, we're gonna have to cancel." We had like a Thursday evening mass. He's like, "We're gonna have to cancel mass or find another priest on the quick." He's like, "I went into the dentist and they found this spot on my X-ray, and they want me to go get it checked out." And I said to him teasingly, I'm like, "Father Tim, you just got to stop chewing rocks." Like I was just kind of being goofy, like plenty of times we had been before. And he's like, "Yeah, actually, I think this is more serious." Turned out to be renal cancer that had traveled to his jaw. And then he went through about a year and a half of different treatments, some of which were more effective, some of which were not. In the middle of that, obviously, was the pandemic. And that kind of ebbed and flowed and kind of with his sickness. But I would say most of that time he was not able to minister in the way that he really wanted to. He was really limited either by the treatment or the side effects or even just the kind of journey through the treatment. And then in April of 2021, on the Easter Vigil, he went home to the Lord. And he was 57 years young. And it was something that certainly was overwhelming, I think, to the whole parish, because for most of us, we really didn't have a chance to connect to him again in the ways that we would have wanted to. He had a profound opportunity to be able to have a lot of conversations, heal some past wounds in his own life. And definitely he left with a profound sense of peace. Actually, it was probably one of the most beautiful journeys I've ever walked with anybody through cancer and going home to the Lord. I could only wish that I would have the opportunity, at the end of my life to be able to have that kind of meaningful presence to people, to be able to, say some goodbyes and heal some wounds. It really was profound. But yeah, so then that left us.
Well, just a word on that. I remember, because I go to John Vianney as my weekend help, so I'm there, helping out most weekends, and I was there for the Easter Vigil Mass because Father Tim, was in the last part of his journey.
Yeah.
And I remember, you came up to me during the Mass and handed me the note that he had passed away, and I remember feeling this great sadness because I really loved Father Tim, like everyone at the parish, but also feeling this kind of like, how beautiful that like Jesus' victory is what we're celebrating here, right? His ultimate victory over death. We're celebrating at the Easter Vigil, right? That in the darkness, in the darkest time, that the light of Christ shines, and that's the time that Father Tim is being united to the Lord. I just thought, what a beautiful, as a priest, what a beautiful time to go and meet the Lord. And, it was too soon for many of us. It felt too soon. But the fact that it was at that time was, just something really beautiful about that.
It was profound because he had, in the closing weeks of his life, he was making the arrangements for his funeral, and he had a profound desire, and he said it a number of times to myself and one of his good friends, Mary, that I need to make it to Easter because I need an alleluia at my funeral, right? And so, I had felt my phone going off during the Easter Vigil, and so I kind of picked an appropriate moment to tuck into the sacristy, and I realized that in kind of going back and forth with his friends who were with him when he died, that he probably passed away right as we were doing baptisms at the Easter Vigil. And it was one of those moments where I was really kind of consoled, I think, in that moment too, because, okay, Father Tim, you got everything you wanted, including like, if he would have picked a moment to choose to go home to the Lord, it's not only, Easter, but those baptisms on Easter Vigil had a really special place in his heart. It was really a moment that he connected in a deep way to his priesthood. So for that to be probably the time was just profound, for sure.
Wow.
So, you were the pastoral associate at the time.
Yep.
There was not another full-time priest there.
Nope.
Father Joe Malia was helping as the administrator, but he had his own parish he was running.
Yeah.
So I really think, you were the one shepherding the parish through that time of Father Tim's sickness, and then kind of in the midst of all the sadness and the funeral and all that, also kind of the transition to a new pastor coming in.
Sure. Well, again, the best analogy that I can give it is that in many ways, a parish staff very much, and a parish community in general, takes on those characteristics of family. And so just like in any one of our families, if somebody's sick, if somebody can't be to the family what they want to be, everybody picks up and they do whatever's necessary to carry each other through it. And I really feel like that's, in a beautiful way, what happened at St. John Vianney. From the moment Father Tim learned about his illness until he went home to the Lord, and even after the fact, we carried each other. And in maybe a lot of administrative ways, a lot fell on, my position to, do a lot of the coordinating that Father Tim wasn't able to do during a sickness. And then, certainly in that transition to a new wonderful pastor, administratively, a lot fell on that position, but there was never a moment when I felt like I was alone in that in any way, shape, or form. I really feel like our whole team and our whole parish really rallied around each other, so that when when Father Jim Grau, our new pastor, arrived that July, I feel like we were ready in a different kind of way because we had been together. And Father Joe Malia and Father Jim also were incredible shepherds to us, because one of the things that Father Malia and Father Grau reminded us constantly is that as much as we were trying to do for the parish and for the whole community, we were also in a grieving process ourselves, and a pretty profound one that none of us could probably truly appreciate how much we were grieving. I know I don't think it really hit me until probably even a couple, like 4 or 5 months ago, like how much that process had taken a toll on me,
Wow.
you know, and how much I still had things I needed to kind of let go and give
I'm
over
sure.
to the Lord. So,
Wow.
Yeah, you talk about the administrative leadership. I also remember all the little things that anyone in parish life would know, right? Like we were doing outdoor confessions at the time, and you're setting the cones up and unlocking doors,
Oh my
and
gosh.
you know, setting up the church for taping off pews and setting the the markers for all that COVID stuff where we were really intense about social distancing. And
Right.
so all the little things too, right? That anyone in a parish knows, like, look around like, oh, who's going to do this? Oh, I guess I'm going to do that.
Right.
well, especially during COVID too, that was the kind of double whammy of it is, you know, at one point it was myself and the business manager.
Right.
Like we had really pushed everything remote that we could. And so it was just the two of us trying to figure out an entire COVID response plan and, you know, again, making sure somebody went into the office and pulled the mail, you know, like all those little details. Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a pretty intense
That's
experience
amazing.
of change and loss, right?
Yeah.
Loss of a friend, loss of a boss, loss of a pastor, and helping to walk a whole parish through that. Beth, you also have a story that's a little different.
Yeah, pretty different.
Pretty different at
Yeah.
Shrine, because you came in under one pastor and
Yeah,
pretty
that's
soon,
true.
within a year.
Yeah, within a year.
So
Yeah.
can you share with us that story?
Yeah. So now Bishop McClory, of course, at the National Shrine of the Little Flower Basilica.
I'm glad you can say that all
The whole
in like
thing,
one
you know,
breath.
you have to.
You know, I
kind of was
never get
doing
that
it,
right.
I was doing it as an homage to him because he always does the whole thing.
Does he?
Even in his video when they were announcing that he was the bishop and introducing him, he managed to fit in that he was coming from being pastor of the National Shrine of the Little Flower Basilica in Royal Oak, Michigan. He fit the whole thing in. So I was kind of doing it for him.
That's great.
So I was brought in with him, and then it was 6 months. It was 6 months in.
Wow.
They announced that he was moving to become the bishop, and then we had no pastor for a couple of months while he kind of transitioned and prepared for that. And then it was, I think it was not until February that Father Horn, of course, was named. Maybe a few weeks prior, and then it came. So. Yeah, big transitions. I think Shrine is a little unique because they've had a 2-year pastor transition every 2 years for the last long while since Monsignor Easton, who passed away suddenly. And so I think that, there's pros and cons to, of course, having that much transition. People are used to it. They're not surprised. But there also can sort of be a resistance to being led, perhaps, because they have the cynicism that you're going to leave too.
Yeah.
You know, you're only here for a couple of years. So that can be a unique challenge. But for me, I mean, I moved my whole family. So I moved my whole family for this job. And then 6 months in, so there's definitely a lot there.
I was thinking about this
transitions.
too. The parish I was at before St. John Vianney was St. Andrew in Rochester. And I hired there under one pastor, and within a month, he was gone.
Oh my gosh,
And
within
then
a month.
I think I went through
dear.
6 different priests.
Oh
Really?
my
In my
gosh.
time, I was there 4 years, and I think we went through 6 priests. Because after the first pastor left, then Monsignor Monfortin, right?
Oh,
was
yeah.
named
And he was
pastor.
there just a short while.
He was there a couple months, and then there was
Then he got
was named a
bishoped.
bishop.
Yeah.
Oh, my
in
gosh.
Steubenville, and then between administrators and all the different transitions. And
Yeah.
so been through it a few
Wow.
times, and you're right.
Right.
I think it's one of those things where after you've been through it a few times, at least you understand the dynamics a little bit better. But it's still a grieving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a grieving not only for you as a minister, but certainly for that community too. And it's that tricky balance that we all experience working in, ministry is that there's that grieving that you have to go through for yourself, and you have to
do.
you have to have good spiritual direction. You have to pray. You got to take time to grieve well. But then also that tricky balance of then being there for that community and being a stabilizing force for that community and helping other folks grieve while you're grieving.
Yeah.
And we know this in our families too. We all do this, right? We grieve together. And I think that one of the things that I've seen in the various pastor transitions that I've watched is when when you're first conscious that it is a grieving process, that really helps. And when you treat it as such, I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we see this as a, administrative change, and what's this going to mean for my position, or how's this going to affect, my relationship with my pastor? And those are all practical elements to it, but also you've lost,
Yeah.
even if you had a really strong or maybe not a strong bond with that prior pastor, it's still a loss. And if you can recognize that and pray through it as a grieving process, I think that helps. And I think also the communities where they come together and support each other as family, instead of maybe reflecting on the transition as a reminder of like divisions that we have, or the fears that we have. If we can build each other up as a family through that, then I think those are the healthiest transitions. When we struggle with that, when we give into the fear, when we give into the doubt of what's going to be next, like you said, Beth, there can definitely be a cynicism that happens. And even at St. John Vianney, I know one of the grieving processes was not only did they lose Father Tim to cancer, they lost their founding pastor, Father Jerry Macklick, to cancer as well.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, they're very blessed as a parish to have had, basically two priests in their entire existence.
Wow.
But losing both of them to cancer, I know a lot of people really struggled to even come back. Once we were kind of reopening for COVID and we were trying to encourage people to come back to Mass, certainly people had their concerns about COVID, but also a lot of people said it was hard to be in the building. It was hard to come back to church because the painful memories were there. And again, for a lot of them, they really didn't have a chance to say goodbye because of the pandemic. So that's its own grieving in itself.
Just talking about grieving for a minute in the context of this change, I mean, grieving the loss of someone who passes away, or grieving the loss of the situation that we were hired into, or we kind of signed up for, and the loss of the relationship with someone we knew. I think as Christians, the way we think about grief is to honor what we've lost and to acknowledge that that's a real loss, whether it's the intense loss of someone's life or the loss of what I knew before, like I knew how to step. But that also prepares us for going forward too, right? So the grieving process is not meant to just turn inward and sulk, but it's meant to acknowledge the loss so that then we can say, okay, but Christ is still victorious here, and Christ still has work for me to do, and so I want to acknowledge that, and then take the step forward as well. And the challenge will be if we don't grieve in the right way, then we can't confidently go forward, right?
Yeah.
Amen.
So, it's about honoring the relationship, but it's also about saying, okay, and now's the time for me to kind of take the next step in my journey and to help our parish do that as well.
Yeah.
Beth,
I just think it's also helpful just to keep in mind that even in all circumstances, right, God is still doing a good thing.
Amen.
God is still doing a thing. God's mercies are new every morning. And I know that I've encountered, and I've probably been people who have sat in the mud and said, it's all bad. It's always bad. It's going to be bad today. It's going to be bad all day tomorrow. And the next week it's going to be bad. And like, I've heard this soliloquy perhaps in my own heart or certainly in others. But then like, where is our faith, right? Our faith tells us that God is always doing a new thing, that there's some good, that there's some movement of God that is both good for our community ultimately that will come from this, or just something that the Lord is doing in my own heart, So I try to think about, well, what would my faith say to this, or is there a new patience or a new trust or something that could come? But I think that at Shrine sometimes we can fall into, oh, it's just this and it'll be this,
right.
as opposed to looking to see, well, it is this, and what is it that God might have for us in this, right? How do we confidently say, I still believe I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, right? How do we claim that for ourselves and for our parishioners in the midst of change?
One of the things that Father Tim was a real blessing to me on was understanding, Father Steve, like you had mentioned, how to grieve in order to allow the Lord to give us freedom to take that next step.
Yeah.
I remember it was a couple summers before he got sick, when kind of, if you will, the 2.0 version of the sexual abuse crisis really kind of
The McCarrick stuff and all that. Yeah.
A lot of that came into the media. I know that was really disorienting to me.
Yeah.
There were certainly a lot of people, a lot of situations that I was close to in some of those situations, and brought up a lot of grieving for me, even about, maybe I had just still an underdeveloped kind of vision in my head of what the church really was, right? And I wanted it to be, kind of a I'm always on the winning team, right? And and what I mean by that is not that Christ isn't going to be victorious through the church, but I just wanted things to be kind of, in this image that I had in my mind. And I remember it was Father Tim who we were praying together about this, because it really impacted him as well. And he reminded me of something I had kept telling him. I have a very deep devotion and affection for Teresa of Calcutta. And we were praying through this one day, and he's like, John, you always are the one that reminds me that, Teresa always said, everybody has your Calcutta, has a Calcutta, find your Calcutta. And he's like, maybe, in some ways, sometimes the church can look a little like Calcutta. It looks messy. It's very human.
True.
It's very raw. And Teresa didn't fix Calcutta, right? What she was eminently faithful.
Yeah.
And so no matter what was in front of her, she was constantly praying through, all right, Lord, where can I find you in this? And I think that that's important for grief as well.
That's beautiful.
That's your gal, right? You
That's
and Teresa of Calcutta.
Yeah.
You guys were hanging out?
Yeah,
in
9
India?
months in Calcutta. Yeah, it's an amazing place, but that rings true, right?
Yeah.
That the messiness of it, and how do we find Jesus there?
Yeah.
So just for our lay ecclesial ministers and others, mission direct people listening, thinking about all the change that's going on now, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you're experiencing that in a really acute way with a new pastor, or maybe families of parishes is kind of like lurking in the background, that things are kind of changing, but you don't feel it yet, right? It's like a slow ship, or a ship that's slowly turning, and you don't quite feel it, but at some point you will.
Yeah.
I think, John, your point about grieving the loss is really good, that we need to take time to do that and just say, okay, things are not going to be what they were. And with a new pastor, I'm going to miss the old pastor, and I'm also going to miss kind of like knowing how everything worked too, right?
Yeah. True.
And, it's, John, you were there many years. Beth, you were there just a couple of months when that happened. So thinking about kind of grieving that loss, I would say for maybe the next part too would be the importance of investing in the future. That, we can feel like we can be hurt or wounded through that grief. And I know for myself, there can be a desire to protect that and not want to kind of be, kind of invested in a way that could hurt in the future. But we do need to kind of like look to the future and say, okay, what do we need to be doing now? How can we kind of work on this transition? Any thoughts you have about that? What worked well, or where challenges came for that, and thoughts on how our parishes going forward can embrace that piece?
I think for me, one, I think it is helpful to be able to have conversations, obviously with that incoming pastor.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that I've tried to do in the many times I've gone through that transition is, one, to give the pastor a good sense of, what this history has been there, what has, what has been, and then also, though, then to kind of open the door. I know, like, when Father Grau and I sat down the first time, I handed him a sheet of paper, and I'm like, look, this is what I do. I said, but as I told Father Tim, I'm here at the service of what the Lord's doing in your ministry as well. And I really want this to be an open conversation. How can I best serve you as pastor? And I want to be that. So if things need to change in my position, or if there are ways that I need to grow in my own ministry in order to support you better, I want to do that. And I think that those conversations early on in a pastor transition are really important, so that we establish that baseline. Like, look, there's nothing to fear. There's nothing to fear from me as, an employee who's been here before, that you have to worry that I'm, maybe too entrenched in what was in the past. I'm here at the service. And then that really gave, like in the case of Father Grau and I, a great opportunity to have a conversation about where the Lord was leading his heart and how he felt about because he's going through a whole emotional process in that transition as well.
Yeah.
And there was a real sharing there that then really helped me to understand, all right, how can I best serve? And I think, again, it's that family dynamic of when we approach this as a family, we want to build each other up in the best way possible to move forward. So however iron can sharpen iron there, if we all take that approach, then I think that makes that a less scary process.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, right? Because what you offered him is both your faithful service and also your surrender.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a gift to offer. I think along the lines of just kind of offering that surrender, I think that the best tip that I've kind of come to is just pursuing my own health, right? And offering that as my faithfulness to those around me, right?
Yeah.
My own spiritual health, my own emotional health, my own physical health, even in the midst of these transitions that can swallow you.
Right.
I think being able to offer that and stay focused on that has allowed me to enter into those exact kinds of conversations without a grasping.
Right.
Right. And I think that especially I would say at Shrine, just because we've had so much transition so fast over so many years now, I think that there can be more of a comfort level with grasping, because within a huge parish of our size, a pastor comes in, to get the lay of the land quickly is going to be a challenge, you know? And so I think that there can be that inclination, which maybe is more of a fear-based, but like, well, what if he doesn't know about this and doesn't prioritize it? You know, I've got to let him know, you know?
Yeah.
So just how do we trust the Lord? How do we sit in the waiting so that we can bring then our faithful surrender and whatever else God might call us to next?
Yeah, that anxiety about the future can really dominate our lives in so many ways. I mean, I know we've all had that experience of putting off the conversation we're scared to have. Yeah. And then we have it and we're like, that wasn't that big a deal, right? Like,
why didn't I just do that earlier?
Yeah, like why did I let this cloud hang over my head forever? And we're not always able to control all those situations about when they'll happen.
Right.
But we can work to say, okay, Lord, I want to trust you that I don't know this pastor. I don't know what he's going to change or what he's going to prioritize. But I'm not going to let anxiety kind of cripple me. And so talking about like caring for your own health, Beth, kind of seeing that as a way to serve the parish and to serve the pastor coming in. I think that's a great tip, some great advice for our listeners to kind of take on in this moment in the Archdiocese where, you know, there can be lots of uncertainty or lots of fear about how my life is going to have to change. And kind of carry that forward to say the Lord doesn't want us to be anxious about that. He wants us to be men and women about the spread of the gospel and learning how to do that well in the circumstances we're in.
Well, and it's easy to fall into a pattern. I've seen it in my own ministry a number of times. What I would really like in my own mind, it'd be great, is if I could get to a certain point where I get the thing rolling and it just kind of stays the same. Right? I used to be a huge fan of the show The West Wing. And one of my favorite parts about the lead character, who's the president in The West Wing?
Charlie Sheen. No, his dad.
Martin Sheen.
Martin Sheen. Yeah.
One of the lines.
Not Charlie Sheen. Not Charlie Sheen.
That'd be a very different West Wing show.
No. Keep that in there.
But one of my favorite parts about Sheen's character is that they'll end like this emotionally intense episode, and then his next line is always, "What's next?" And I really feel like, especially in ministry, that has to be at the core of our heart. Is not, hey, I want to get this thing to a stasis point so that it can just stay the same. And even though that would feel great and it would be a lot easier that way, the Lord's constantly calling us to what's next, right? Yeah. And so that fear sets in when we feel like we had something and it might be taken away from us. But that when I get to that point and I get to that fear, that's usually a good reminder for me that, number one, I'm probably not praying. I'm probably more relying on whatever I think my great gifts are, or, my own strength or that type of thing. And I'm not really surrendering to the Lord at that moment. And I think that also when we get to that point of just desiring the consistency, that also usually means that the Lord has something more for us that we just haven't tapped. And sometimes these transitions give us an opportunity to see that.
Yeah.
It's one of the gifts that I've experienced a number of times, is that new pastor brings in an entirely fresh perspective.
Yeah.
And I've not had it happen yet where that fresh perspective didn't open up something for the parish that was a new opportunity.
And sometimes that something more is a change.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
I mean, that happens when a
For
new
sure.
pastor comes. There can be change in staff. And, and that's a good thing at times, right? I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that kind of investing in the future? Or kind of,
I love that what's next. That's really good. I think I just remember we were sitting around and so Bishop McClory came in and did a video announcement, and then the video cuts out and we're all just in the room together.
Did that really happen?
Yeah, and I remember one of my questions was, so what projects stop and what projects keep going?
Yeah.
And there's no one left to answer that question,
Right.
And so I think for me, another tip is just to continue to move forward. And deliberately. For my temperament, I also need to move more slowly because I can move a little fast. I like to say that I'm naturally caffeinated. And people really don't appreciate it when I add more. So I think for me, what I've come to know about myself is I need to move more slowly so that I'm not getting ahead of someone who's not even here yet, so that I'm really waiting and allowing that to. But also, you can't sit around and do nothing, right? There's plenty of things we know we still need to do. So the what's next question can be answered in a lot of ways. What's next is holiness.
Right.
What's next is accompanying the parishioners. What's next is being faithful to what you've been asked to do to this point,
That's great. So, I mean, the way I understand this, correct me, guys, if I'm wrong, but it's, taking time to grieve the loss, making sure that we ourselves are healthy in our relationships, healthy in our prayer life, and then kind of ready to move forward, not grinding everything to a halt and not running ahead of where we need to go, so that we are prepared to continue the work of ministry that the Lord wants us to do.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, ready to move forward together. And then I think that's the crucial piece. You're moving forward even with that new pastor, right? And he's going through his own process of both grief and seeing what the Lord's moving him forward in his own ministry, and making sure that you feel like you as a staff, as a community, you're doing that together along with him. Yeah. I think those are the healthiest transitions.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Doing it together.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. One of the questions I love to ask our guests is about prayer life, right? If we're going to be able to do all these things, we're going to need to be praying and walking with the Lord. What does prayer life look like for you?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of transitions going on in my own life. And I find that when I'm in that kind of discernment transition mode, especially, I tend to be very much either like I read a lot as a springboard into my prayer. I love Lectio Divina. I love different kinds of spiritual reading. So a lot of times that's a springboard for me. When I get to these discernment phases, though, as much as I can be still, it really helps. So doing those, doing different, prayer techniques that will just basically bring me to that place of more like contemplative type of prayer where, all right, Lord, I've got nothing. I don't know what to say. I don't even know what to think right now. I just need the assurance of your presence. And that being still puts me in a much better position to listen. Because I'm very convincing if I talk to God, right? I've got all these great things to say that I'm sure he really needs to hear, right? I know for me, though, in that transition time, the more I can put myself to just be, then that grace and that strength to avoid that fear really comes the most.
Beautiful.
Beth, I'd like to ask you about your prayer in times of transition, but I'll share mine first. being a priest, having a number of different assignments, and in some ways them being significant changes from being in a parish to working in the chancery, then to working in the seminary, like significant changes for me. One of the things that's helpful for me in my own prayer, and John, you touched on this, was just the humility of going to prayer. And for me, that's manifested in just laughing at myself sometimes, right? Like feeling really like I don't know what to do right now.
Yeah.
And going to the Lord and like, Lord, I don't even know where to begin now. So for me, that's a great opportunity to trust in him.
Yeah.
So to say like, Lord, I have no idea what to do. I don't even know what to be excited about. I'm excited. I'm nervous. But I don't know why exactly yet. And I know I'm going to make a bunch of mistakes, but I know you're in charge and I know you're Lord. And so it's a great, for me, a reset in, you talk about kind of getting comfortable and getting everything the way you want it. It's a great reset to say, okay, God, you're in charge and I want to respond to your movements. And so it's a humbling prayer. So often it's not so much Lectio Divina. It's just kind of conversation with the Lord and reaffirming that he's Lord, that I am not, and that he can do awesome things through me because he's God, right? So not because I got it all figured out, but because he's God. So it's this kind of trust in him in the midst of my own weakness. And I find that to be really, really helpful for my prayer in those times.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I think years ago I was in a meeting that wasn't going well, and I started looking up other jobs. No one could see my screen, so that made it okay. Anyway, I heard the Lord say, "Beth, you're not trusting me."
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and I closed it. And I thought, okay, Lord, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you. Yeah. So I think all the things that you've shared are beautiful for praying and in transition. One thing that I went through a 6-month-long transition, waiting to hear about something. This was years back, and what I ended up doing is I just was drawn to Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there's any excellence, and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And so I just took one of those per week, and I said, all right, Lord. And I just sat down in prayer in the morning, and I said, Lord, what is true? And I just took out a whole big piece of paper, and I wrote true. Yeah. And I just asked the Lord to tell me everything that's true, and I just filled the whole piece of paper, and I carried it around all week. Yeah, and then the next week, I got to the next word. All right, Lord, what is honorable? What is honorable? And it was really beautiful. Yeah. What is so it was that was really a beautiful thing to help direct my mind back to what is true, direct my mind back to what I should be thinking about and what I can trust in, what I can hold to. And that just led me back to the Lord. So I found that to be a really helpful thing. And I've gone back to it a couple other times as well.
Yeah. Like gone back to those sheets where you wrote it down?
And made new ones.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But whenever I'm waiting, anything that's 10 weeks long, it's a pretty good fit for. So.
There's a prayer, Father Steve, you kind of reminded me of it. There's a prayer by Thomas Merton. That's one of my go-tos, especially in a discernment or transition time. And it actually the first couple lines are, my Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I can't see the road ahead of me. I have no idea where it will end, right? But the transition in that prayer, kind of like you mentioned, is that, but I know that, the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that in everything that I'm doing. Right. So it's really putting that trust back in him that I can't see anything. I don't get it. None of this makes sense, but I know you make sense.
Right.
And I know if I keep my eyes fixed on you, right, then you're going to lead me not only to where I need to go, but you're going to lead me so far beyond where I thought I could go.
Yeah. A lot of that comes out of either the two kind of extremes I see a problem in my own life and in others is the super confidence that I know what I'm doing all the time, get out of my way, I'm here, and all of that, which I find really off-putting and annoying. Yeah. And then on the other side, this kind of Eeyore complex of I can't do anything.
Right.
Oh, well, I'm just this awful sinner. What can I do?
Right.
And I think the antidote to that is this radical confidence that God in his power can work through me and my weakness.
Amen.
And
Yeah,
that God,
beautiful.
like God's got this. So I should
Yeah.
have confidence
Right.
that he's going to work
Yeah.
Yep.
in me. And I get to like participate in that. I'm not just a bystander,
Right.
right? I
Yeah.
get to participate in that. And and I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So
I love
Love it.
seeing the victories that God works in other people, but I think the things sometimes that I'm most excited to see is how God works victory in my own heart too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he can heal all of those things that I'm afraid of. And
Yeah.
so that's a lot of times where I find that source of confidence is, Lord, you can even conquer my own rocky, thorny, stubborn heart. And I don't have to be afraid anymore.
yeah.
There's nothing to
Yeah.
be afraid of.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, let's wrap
Yeah.
up with a little Bible trivia game because I know John is a Bible expert.
Said no one ever.
It's been said on this podcast. It's been proclaimed. I'm going to print up some I know Beth tells me how she knows the Bible better than anyone she's
I have
ever
not said
met.
that. I have
Okay.
never said
Every
that.
day
That's not
I
true.
talk to her. She's no, I'm kidding. She doesn't. But let's just do a little fun little Bible trivia to wrap up here. So John, I'll ask you the first question.
Okay.
What city was Saul traveling to when the Lord appeared to him?
Damascus, right?
Ding, 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 ding.
Hey, all right.
Correctamundo.
I'm sweating bullets over
You
here,
can
by
ask
the
me.
way.
You can ask me the same question. Damascus.
Beth, how many plagues were there?
Oh, 7, 9, 9. Oh,
9,
boy,
and then
I'm
there
not
was
sure.
then there was that last one.
And then there's the last one.
Yeah,
so 10.
10. Ding, 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 ding.
I was ready for Damascus. I was all ready.
John, what book in the Old Testament is the story of Samson and Delilah?
Oh, my goodness. You did stump me on that. Can I phone a friend? Beth?
You can.
I can't help though.
Oh, man.
Was Samson a
Samuel,
king?
Kings.
First
No,
Kings?
he was before the kings. He was a
Judge?
he was a judge.
Oh,
So it's in
Judges?
the book of Judges. Ding,
Rock
ding,
and
ding, ding,
roll.
ding.
Yep.
Okay.
Can you, as a team, put the 4 Gospels in order based on length? The number of books
Mark is
chapters
the
they-
short-
Mark is the
Shortest.
shortest.
Matthew's the longest.
right.
John's 21. Luke's 24.
There you go.
Look at this.
Way to
All
go.
right.
We're gonna
I
high
guess
five.
does that redeem the plague?
Yeah, that's right.
More of an Old Testament,
Yeah,
or more of a New Testament.
More of a New Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put the Gospels in order based on how good they are. John.
Oh, that's subjective.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
But there's a right answer.
Jeez.
See, I am definitely a Johannine guy. So
Okay.
I would start with John, and then Luke, because Luke and I speak a very similar kind of. It's easy for me to dive into Luke. Mark is probably third, just because I love getting straight to the point, and Mark is
He gets right immediately.
yeah,
Immediately.
He's not messing around.
And then
Yeah.
you don't like Matthew.
No,
Okay.
I like
so
it. Yeah, right. Yeah. To all those folks at the Catholic Biblical School of Michigan that I used to teach for, I'm sorry.
John's saying there's 3 legitimate
Yeah,
Gospels
that's right,
and
yeah.
1 dubious.
I went on Father Steve's podcast and turned into a heretic. How did that happen?
Beth, do you have a favorite of the Gospels?
I would be John as well. I would
Okay.
also go John and then Luke.
Huh.
And then I love the other two both.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I would do
Good
Mark.
save, by the way, there with loving the other two both.
See how I just
Yeah, well done.
I avoided that. I avoided that.
I would say Mark is my favorite because I like
Yeah.
the short and I like how punchy the stories
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
in Mark.
Yeah.
So, and then last question: what's the longest book in the Bible? The most chapters? What's the shortest?
Longest book in the Bible. Well, I mean, Isaiah's got 60 plus, so that's a lot. Psalms,
can't-
of course, will win. The
Oh,
Psalms.
yeah.
Psalms based on chapters. Yeah.
Based on chapters.
Isn't that how we're
Yeah.
doing it?
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
not doing it a
exactly,
different way?
exactly,
yeah.
Is it by word count?
Word count, it would be different.
That
but
would
based on
be
chapters of
OP
Psalms.
though. I mean, that would be like if you could do it by word count, Beth, you would win the award for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I don't think I can.
Yeah, me
What-
neither.
What's the shortest?
Wouldn't that be Mark? No, it's got to be
No,
one
it's
of the
prophets.
either the prophets or one of the Pauline letters.
Oh, of course. That's it's hard to say.
There's a book that only has 1 chapter. in
Oh, of course, Philemon.
Oh,
Philemon.
it. Even shorter
Philemon.
than that
Huh?
is
What's
3rd
shorter?
John.
Oh, 3rd John.
Yeah.
okay.
Some people call it Little John. No, actually, no one calls it that. Anyway,
Nice.
John Lajiness, it's been a joy being with you. And Beth would fire me from the podcast if I didn't thank you
Yes.
for the ministry
Thank
that you did.
you.
Well,
Thank you for everything you've done, and thank you for all you're going to be doing now through Sacred Heart. And yeah.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be with you and the great faithfulness that I know both of you bring to your ministries as well. It's a joy to be in the vineyard together. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah. This has been the Encounter Grow Witness podcast. This is a podcast by and for those who work in ministry, supporting each other to grow in our relationship with Christ and the church to enable us to be better witnesses of his love in the world. Let's be better fishers of men together. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this monthly podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to another episode of Encounter for a Witness.
What happened to morning coffee? What happened to
Right.
morning coffee?